got done and the efficiency of my office. Right, we now start with questions. Secretary of State for Justice, Simon Jupp.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to govern is to choose. Choices we've made mean the most dangerous offenders, the acid attackers, the rapists, the knife-point robbers, who are sentenced to 7 years or more, are required to spend longer in custody. The sentencing bill goes further, ensuring that murders involving sexual or sadistic conduct will lead to a whole life order unless there are exceptional circumstances, and those convicted of the most serious sexual offences, including rape, will serve 100% of their custodial term in prison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the measures my right honourable friend has outlined, as will my constituents in East Devon. Rapists deserve amongst the most severe possible custodial sentences. Can my right honourable friend update the House as to how sentence lengths have increased for this utterly vile crime since 2010?
Grateful to my honourable friend. He's absolutely right. Rape is an appalling crime. To his question, in 2010, the average custodial sentence for adult rape was 6.5 years, and prison governors were required to release offenders at the halfway mark. Today, the average sentence is over 40% longer, and offenders serving more than 4 years must serve 2/3 of that sentence behind bars. As I say, we're going further still.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For all the positive words from the Secretary of State, the reality in our prisons is that people are being sent out, that the prison estate has not kept pace with the rhetoric that we're hearing from the government. And actually, this is a government that's constantly sending criminals onto our streets because they don't have the prison facilities to house them. So isn't the reality that what we need is less fine words and actually more action out of this government to keep our streets safe?
No, that's not a fair characterisation. So the capacity in our estate is much larger than when we inherited it, point one. Point two is we have kick-started the largest prison expansion since the Victorian era, £4 billion allocated. So we've opened HMP Fossway, we've opened HMP Five Wells, HMP Millsike will be opening next year. We've got planning permission for Gartree, for Grendon Spring Hill. We've also got more spaces coming on at Liverpool, at Birmingham, at Norwich, RDCs and so on. We believe that those who commit the most appalling crimes should be locked up for longer. And as I say, it was wrong that rapists would be automatically released at the halfway mark in 2010. We are the government that's putting that right.
Sir Robert Butland.
I commend my right honourable and learned friend for building on the work that he and I did together to ensure that the most dangerous and serious offenders spent longer behind bars. The consultation on sentencing in murder concluded a few weeks ago. Can I just press my right honourable friend, when can we reasonably expect a response to this very sensitive and important issue?
Look, he's absolutely right. This is a sensitive issue. As he knows from practice, those who commit an offence of murder using a knife which is brought to the scene outside can expect a starting point of 25 years. But as the Gould family and the Devey family have made so powerfully clear, where that takes place inside the home, there are very difficult and sentencing decisions for judges. So the consultation has ended, and I pay tribute to my honourable friend who has spoken to a number of people about this, as indeed have I. We will be responding in the coming weeks, but this is a matter which requires careful thought, and I pay tribute to him for the work that he's done on this.
Foord.
Mr. Speaker, Barnaby Webber from Taunton was described by his family as an extraordinary, ordinary person. His killer was found to have been guilty of manslaughter rather than murder on the basis of being subject to paranoid schizophrenia. His mother, Emma Webber, says it is abhorrent that murder charges were not pursued against her son's killer. Will the Secretary of State consider recategorising homicide laws to introduce first-degree and second-degree murder?
There is nothing that I can say from this dispatch box that will put right the horror that the poor family of Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar and indeed Ian Austin suffered in those appalling attacks from Valdo Calacane. The issue of the law of homicide is one that has been considered greatly. In fact, as a backbencher, I led a debate on this issue of first and second degree murder. This is something that, of course, we keep under careful consideration, but there is complexity to it. But it's certainly a matter that we will consider.
To Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The law in this area has been updated when needed. For example, the cremation regulations of 2008 are currently being amended as part of the ongoing death certification reform. However, the primary legislation on cremation dates back to 1902, and in light of developments since then, I believe a more comprehensive review is needed, and that's why the Law Commission have therefore agreed to consider the law governing cremation as part of their burial, cremation and new funerary methods project. That's already commenced, and we await their findings with interest.
I'm grateful for the Minister's answer, and obviously with what's going on in Hull there are great concerns. I know the Minister can't speak directly about that issue because of the investigation, but in this area there's no formal regulators around funeral directors, and Joseph Barsby, who's the MD at G Sellers, a very much loved local funeral director who's at the forefront of funeral facilities in Hinckley, is very concerned because they want to lead and don't want to be tarnished with it being sucked into problems within the industry. So will the Minister meet with Joseph to discuss ways we can improve the system? And failing that, will there be a way for these funeral directors to feed in information and ideas to improve the system?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend raises a very good point, and in fact the Department had already started work on a call for evidence, which will be issued shortly, on where we go on the regulation of the funeral director sector. But I'm more than happy to ensure that the views of any funeral director are fed in, and of course I'm more than happy to meet with the firm in his constituency.
Emma Hardy.
Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for his productive and supportive way he's engaged with me over the appalling situation with the legacy funeral directors in Hull. I'm utterly committed to regulating this industry and never again allowing that appalling, heartbreaking situation to be repeated. I've heard the response he's given to the honourable member there, but I wondered if he could speak a little bit more about timeframes and whether he agrees that in the meantime, before statutory regulation comes in, if we could encourage all funeral directors to subject themselves to the voluntary regulation provided by one of the trade bodies instead, and do everything they can to reassure the public that not all funeral directors are like the appalling situation that we've had in my constituency.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if I could also return the compliment that the Honourable Lady has, I think, handled this appalling incident in her constituency with a great deal of skill. And I'm also committed to working with her and my honourable friend, the member for North Dorset, who is leading on some of the initial responses alongside the local authority. The call for evidence on where we go on regulation will commence in the next few months. Where it goes, of course, we have to wait for the public consultation. What I am doing is meeting this afternoon with the two major trade bodies to see how they can assist on voluntary inspections to ensure that what we have seen has come out of this terrible incident, which nobody would have thought could possibly have occurred, it is quite horrific as what's been happening, is that we get this right so that people do have confidence in the vast majority of funeral directors who are entirely respectable and treat the deceased with the respect and with the care that they expect.
Stephen Craft.
Number 3, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Reducing reoffending is a core mission of this government, and that's why, for example, we rolled out the genuinely transformational policy of 12 weeks guaranteed accommodation to offenders on release. And it's why we've invested heavily in employment, with prison employment leads in every resettlement prison. The plan is working. Since 2010, the reoffending rate has fallen significantly from 31% to 25%. And in the 2 years to March 2023, the proportion of prison leavers in employment 6 months post-release more than doubled.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for his answer. He may be aware that the Welsh Affairs Committee recently has been hearing from businesses like Timpson's and Williams Homes about the work being done to train and recruit prisoners in Wales. And while there was a lot of praise for the New Futures network, which brokers partnerships between employers and prisons, can I ask my right honourable friend what is being done to expand the number of release on temporary licence schemes, which we heard are really important for improving employability and giving prisoners a better chance of holding down a job when they get out of the gate?
And I thank him for the interest he's showing in this area. And he's absolutely right to pay tribute to the New Futures network, which does exceptional work in custody. Of course, what they now are able to do is liaise very often with employment advisory boards, that's local business people in the area, and to ensure that prisoners are trained in the skills that they need for the jobs in that particular area. And one of the things I was so impressed by when I went to HMP Bowen, of course in Wales, is there you have in that employment hub, you have a video suite where they can literally be interviewed by their employers on the outside. To specific points on Rottle That is something that prison governors keep under review, and certainly in the right cases where it's safe to the public, it can be a useful tool to ensure they're rehabilitated and get into work so they can be law-abiding citizens in the future.
Direct to it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Secretary of State will know, is that one of the ways to reduce reoffending is to break the cycle of drugs mixed use. But the problem is, though, of course, in too many prisons, there's a high incidence of drugs getting into prisons. So what's he doing to reduce the amount of drugs in our prisons?
He's right. It is, of course, really important that we tackle drugs coming into prison. So he asks the specific question. Well, we rolled out £100 million in prison gate security to ensure that there's airport-style security, there are scanners, but also body scanners with very, very high resolution to ensure that those people coming into the jails can be scanned for illicit contraband which may be being transported internally. That's important. We're also rolling out additional technology which can scan mail for psychoactive substances which have been impregnated into the paper. This is just one of a suite of measures that we're taking, plus, of course, the drug abstinence wings. Can I also take this opportunity? I misspoke about the name of Ian Coates, who was the third victim of the Nottingham attacks.
We now come to the Chair of the Select Committee, Sir Robert Neil KC.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable and learned friend's comments about the progress that has been made in tackling reoffending, but he will be aware that it remains stubbornly high, and we are in the unfortunate position that we still imprison more people than most of our neighbours in Europe, at the same time still have higher rates of reoffending. Does that not posit the fact that we need to make more intelligent use of prison and of alternatives to custody as part of a joined-up system? Would he agree that the provisions of the sentencing bill are particularly valuable in this regard, and can we hope for its swift return to the House?
Can I thank my right honourable and learned friend for his excellent point? See, what he says is something that I passionately agree with. Strip out the emotion and follow the evidence. And what the evidence shows is that there are tools available to this generation of politicians which weren't necessarily available 10 or 15 years ago. I'm not just talking about GPS tags, which we've doubled. I'm talking about alcohol tags, which have a 97% compliance rate and ensures that the reoffending rate for those who live with the sword of Damocles hanging over them can be much, much lower than those who spend a short time in custody.
As it was his birthday yesterday, Jim Shaw.
Thank you. You're never going to let me forget about my birthday. Can I just say, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Can I thank the Secretary of State very much for his answers and for his commitment very clearly to physical and skills training. The other important one, Mr. Speaker, is the issue of education. Keep the minds active, keep the bodies active physically, and thereby you'll have a person who wishes when they leave prison that they won't reoffend. Can I ask the Minister what's been done educationally to help as well? And will he share the ideas that the Secretary of State very clearly has with the equivalent Minister in Northern Ireland? Thank you.
Absolutely. So we're rolling out a prison education service, and that's important, and considerable sum of money, around £150 million a year, so that's significant. But the thing that's critical is you've got to have the tie-up between the local employment advisory boards, who liaise with the Governor and the New Futures Network to ensure that the education that's being provided is tailored to the jobs on the outside. And that's why, for example, people are being assisted with the literacy so that they can do jobs, whether it's in hospitality or Clink's kitchens or horticulture. That's when education works, when it is tailored to the job opportunities on the outside. That's how you get prisoners motivated and engaged. And yes, I'd be happy to engage as he proposes.
Fabian Hammond. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When an LPA application is submitted, there is a statutory 4-week waiting period, and during this period, any objections can be lodged before an LPA can be registered. For registered LPAs, any concerns about an attorney abusing an LPA can be reported to the Office of the Public Guardian, who will investigate. And as part of the modernising LPAs following the Powers of Attorney Act of 2023, new identity verification processes will be introduced to further strengthen the system.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over 6 million people in Britain now have lasting power of attorney agreements. I've been inundated recently with so many harrowing stories from across the country where abusers have targeted elderly people and stolen their estates from under their noses. So, will the Minister ensure that a proper medical assessment is now carried out before an LPA is activated, and that the digitisation of LPAs does not lead to families losing their loved ones' estates to unscrupulous abusers?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman makes a very good point, which I'm more than happy to take away and write to him with the steps that we take to ensure that level of check is in place. But I can also reassure the House that under the LPAs, to ensure that the LPA can't be issued without the donor's knowledge, they can now check the used LPA service on gov.uk to see where LPAs have been issued, so they can see if they've been issued without their knowledge.
Stim Deutsche.
Question number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. The number of children in custody has fallen by nearly 70% in the last decade. But this means those in custody are more complex, with 71% detained for violent offences. While the rate of prisoner-on-prisoner assaults declined by 7% July to September 23 compared with the same period in 2022, those of assaults on staff did increase. This is why all sites have a safety strategy reflecting local drivers of violence, and this includes tackling the use of weapons, training staff in conflict resolution. Much has been done, but there continues to be more to do, and we remain focused on doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, but these strategies clearly aren't working. There were 320 assaults on staff between July and September 2023, of which 24 were serious. That's a 9% increase in year-on-year assaults in the Children and Young People's Estate. So when will he put in place a proper plan to cut violence in the youth estate and keep staff safe?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. The plan that we've put in place is working. There is more to do. He highlighted those statistics, which, as he'll acknowledge, I acknowledged at the box as well. We believe our approach to tackling violence, to conflict resolution in our youth estate is the right one. We will continue to press forward with it to reduce those rates of assaults on our hard-working and dedicated prison officers and staff.
Shadow Minister Janet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government has decided to change the use of Cookham Wood YOI to an adult prison. This follows a lack of progress to improve young people's access to education and increased levels of violence on the prison estate. Behaviour management methods of keeping young people in their cells have failed. This decision also puts a spotlight on the wider crisis in the adult prisons. When the young people are transferred, how will the Minister ensure the practice of keeping these young peoples in their cells and the cycle of violence will end?
Well, I'm grateful to the Shadow Minister for her question about Cookham Wood. As she will be aware, there are a number of specific local factors at work in Cookham Wood which led to the urgent notification and the challenges with addressing that. In terms of a specific question about those young people and their transfer to other institutions, firstly, a number of them will be released in the period before Cookham Wood closes. Those who will still be in custody will be assessed individually, with them being engaged with and indeed their families being engaged with, to ensure they are placed in institutions which are best suited to their needs and give them the greatest opportunity to progress and to make positive life choices for when they are released.
Janet Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a shame the Minister did not address the violence specifically. Violence is indeed a challenge across the youth estate, and not just at Cookham Wood. Recently, a girl with challenging behaviours and complex needs at Wetherby YOI was restrained and then stripped, not once, but twice by male officers. In the context of rising violence and extreme self-harm, does the Minister believe this is acceptable, and what alternative provision does he have in mind other than the Keppel unit in Wetherby YOI?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady. In respect to the point about violence in the estate, I did address that in response to her Honourable Friend's original question. She asked specifically about the case highlighted by the Chief Inspector in his recent report. What happened there was clearly against policy. It was clearly wrong, and it was clearly concerning. But I do have to correct her. The individual involved was at no point strip search. That was an inaccurate reporting. At all times, the modesty of the individual was protected with a blanket. So I'm afraid what was said in report that it was a strip search is not correct. Clothes were removed under a blanket in order to protect life where there was an imminent risk to it. Those officers made a very difficult decision in the circumstances at the time to protect life. But it is quite right, as I and my right honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, have done, that we look into the specifics of what happened. And I think we just need to be a little bit cautious at this point about accepting everything that was reported as fact.
Chris, number 6.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question. I understand, Mr Speaker, that question 10 has been withdrawn, so I would just answer question 6. All assaults on prison staff are utterly unacceptable, and that's why we've taken steps to protect our staff. And I put on record something that I suspect will be shared by both sides of the House, which is our gratitude to all those who work in our prisons. We've rolled out parva spray in adult male prisons and body-worn video cameras to protect staff. The maximum penalty for those who assault prison officers has been doubled, and we've completed our £100 million security investment programme to clamp down on the illicit items that fuel prison violence. The rate of assault on staff in the 12 months to September 2023 was 10% lower than in the 12 months to September 2019 before the pandemic, but it is still far too high.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I know the Minister cares about this, and I know the Minister would want to see solutions to how we protect prison officers across the prison estate. But according to the Prisoners Officers Association and Community Union, the serious offences against prison officers is up 10% on last year. 750 of those assaults are deemed to be serious, and there are now 23 attacks being recorded every day on the prison estate across England and Wales. There is huge concerns about overcrowding. The level of prison officers are at 10% lower than in 2010. And it's positive view of the Secretary of State talking about opening new prisons, but if there are no prison officers there to work there, how are we going to resolve these issues? And more worryingly, Mr Speaker, prison officers are taking to the media to say they are frightened for their lives to work on the prison estate. I don't think the plan is working. I believe the Minister wants to fix it. But what is the next plan to resolve and to ensure our prison officers remain safe in our prison estate?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. No one in any walk of life should be in fear at work of assault, and that obviously includes our dedicated prison officers. I've already highlighted the steps we are taking to tackle some of the root causes of this violence in terms of the £100 million security measures to tackle illicit drugs, mobile phones, the sort of things that fuel the violence, the deployment or the ability to deploy parva spray, but also he quite rightly highlights the importance in this context of the number of prison officers, and that's why I'm pleased that in the latest statistics published at the end of last year, they are up by 1,500 and retention rates are improving as well.
Duncan Beck.
Question number 7, please, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The 2021 Domestic Abuse Act was transformative for the protections it gave to domestic abuse victims through the justice system. To give just a few examples, upfront legal aid is available to all domestic abuse victims seeking a protective order without having to establish evidence of abuse. Our upcoming legal aid means test review will significantly increase eligibility and exclude disputed assets such as the marital home from consideration. Perpetrators are prohibited from cross-examining their victims, and victims are entitled to the support of an independent domestic violence advisor throughout the process.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My office has recently assisted with several cases regarding use of court proceedings involving the victims of domestic abuse. And in many cases, family issues are going straight to trial without any mediation, and that, of course, causes far more trauma for all those parties concerned. So can the Minister just assure me that we will always place the victim at the forefront of court proceedings in these circumstances?
Minister.
It is to specifically address this issue that we commissioned our harms panel, who conducted excellent work, as a result of which the Ministry of Justice has conducted a pilot of Pathfinder courts in Dorset and North Wales, focused at preventing exactly this. Those courts have focused on creating a less adversarial system where domestic abuse allegations are investigated and resolved at an early stage without being intensified through court. My honourable friend will be glad to hear that so successful has been this pilot that it is now going to be rolled out on a national basis, starting next month with courts in South East Wales and Birmingham.
Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In 2023, 67,938 rapes were recorded by the police, but there were just 2,008 rape convictions. It's well documented that there is not enough support for rape victims through the court processes. The use of counselling notes has a chilling effect, and the long waits for their case to go to trial has an intense impact on survivors, often causing them to withdraw. Therefore, what is the Minister going to do to ensure that victims and survivors are supported throughout the court process?
It is not in dispute that rape is the most serious offence a person can experience that is not homicide. It is as a result of the implementation of the end-to-end rape review that we have started with Operation Soteria through the police forces. That hasn't just improved rape prosecutions. In some forces, they are referring quadruple the volume of cases to the CPS that they were once before, and overall prosecutions have more than doubled. We have close to 1,000 independent sexual violence advisors working in the system, holding a victim's hand from the minute that they go to the police to the conclusion of the process. I met some in Hatfield last month who told me that victims had told them they'd only stayed in the process because of that support. It is night and day from where it was in 2010. We are seeing every quarter we review the outcome of the rape review, and the curve is going like this. So of course it is a crucial issue, but one on which on every single matrix there is significant improvement being made.
Dean Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Domestic abuse has no place in modern society or in any society. I would like to know from my honourable friend what work is happening to make sure victims of domestic abuse are supported throughout the entire process. We have a fantastic organisation in Watford called Watford Women's Centre that helps many abuse victims, but what is the government doing to make sure that they're supported throughout and that the perpetrators are taken to court and justice is served?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his excellent question. I give him a similar answer to the honourable lady just now. One of the things that has been transformative in victim support is the provision not just of independent sexual violence advisors, but independent domestic abuse advisors. Again, there are nearly 1,000 in the system helping victims every step of the way. One of the things that I'm most excited about in this very challenging area of the law is the pilot that is launching next month for domestic abuse protection orders that will give police or victims the ability to go to the magistrates' court or the family court to seek a blend of issues, whether that's a non-molestation order, an occupancy order, a stalking prevention order, and create positive obligations on the perpetrator, whether that's alcohol abuse or a perpetrator programme, a comprehensive package of support for domestic abuse victims.
Sarah Aldey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In Scotland, victims of rape and serious sexual assault are now able to have access to free court transcripts. This project will give victims free access to transcripts that previously would have cost thousands of pounds. However, the UK government is refusing to match the scheme and is only committing to a one-year pilot scheme in which free copies of sentencing remarks will be made available to victims of serious crime. And this isn't good enough. It fails those victims like my constituent, Juliana Terlizzi, who was charged over £7,000 to read the transcript of her rapist's trial. Ahead of the report stage of the Victim and Prisoners Bill in the other place next month, will the Justice Secretary therefore meet with Juliana and I to discuss going further in their pilot to match the Scottish scheme, which will help get victims the justice they deserve? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I firstly want to reassure the Honourable Lady that the Courts Minister has said he will meet with her to discuss this. She will know that the cost of transcription of a full trial can be as high as £20,000. But the power and the impact of any trial is in the judge's sentencing remarks at the end, where there has been a conviction in seeing everything, society's opprobrium, expressed through the voice of the judge, and that is why we're conducting a pilot for free sentencing remarks in all of these cases.
Tony Antoniazzi.
Question number 8, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, delays in decision-making during care proceedings can have a significant impact on children, and we recognise there's more to do to address this challenge. And that's why last year the government published its response to the independent review of children's social care, setting out a programme of action to achieve better outcomes. And the Department for Education are investing an extra £10 million on new initiatives to address the longest delays and meet the statutory requirement to resolve proceedings within 26 weeks.
Mr. Speaker, data from CAFCAS shows children that have been removed from their parents by the state are having to wait an average of 46 weeks to get a final decision from the, on where they're going to live. Mr. Speaker, it's heartbreaking. So what assessment has the Minister made of the impact of extended family proceedings on the mental health of these children who are involved and their ability to access the support and CAMS?
The Honourable Lady raises a very serious point, and obviously the impact on the child but also on the wider family is appreciated, and that's why we have invested in capacity, more money for CAFCAS, more money for judges, more money for recorders, more sitting days, to ensure that we increase capacity so these hearings can be heard effectively. And that's why also we are focusing on the public law outline, which sets a maximum number of hearings and the time limits to ensure that these proceedings are heard on time. If the Honourable Lady wishes to raise any specific cases, I'm very happy to meet with her so we can get to the bottom of any specific problems in that particular case.
Shadow Minister Alex Cunningham.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Despite the response given to my honourable friend, the member for Gower, the Government are still a long way from solving the crisis in the family courts. We've heard of the 46-week average, but in 13 out of the 42 designated family judge areas in England and Wales, the wait is double the statutory target of 26 weeks. Then there are the 80,000 private family law cases that can take 45 weeks to be resolved, and the number of new cases are increasing faster than disposals. Does the Government have any concern or compassion for some of the most vulnerable children in the country? They're being let down. I'd invite the Minister to try again and assure the House that the crisis won't get even worse.
Mr Speaker, I invite my shadow to, if there's a lever that I've not pulled, then by all means let me know what it is and I will address it. But in terms of this government, we are spending more money on attracting more judges, more recorders, maximising sitting days, investing in the public law outline, and on the flip side of public family law, on private family law, as well as mediation, we're investing an extra £55 million announced in the budget to address the productivity and the backlogs. Every single lever that will increase capacity and increase productivity is being pulled. But of course, I'm more than happy if my friend there has some insight. If he shares it with me, then I'm sure we can work on a better solution.
Stephanie Pick.
Question 9, please.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And with permission, I will answer questions 9 and 13 together. More than 90% of all criminal cases are resolved in the Magistrates' Court, and that includes burglaries, thefts, assaults, criminal damage, drugs offences, and thanks to Magistrates' exceptional efforts, the caseload has come down significantly from its post-pandemic peak, and cases are being heard promptly. To help bring down the caseload in the Crown Court, the Government has invested heavily to allow courts to operate at full throttle. It's recruited around 1,000 judges and tribunal members across all jurisdictions this financial year. We've kept open 20 Nightingale courtrooms to boost capacity, and we're also on track to increase spending on criminal legal aid by over £140 million a year.
Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In South Yorkshire, Sheffield Crown Court has been forced to shut twice in the last 2 years due to flooding. This is in addition to the already record-breaking court backlog across the UK of 67,000 cases. So what measures have the Government put in place to deal with unplanned closure of courts to ensure that people still have access to justice?
Yeah. I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her question. So one of the first things I did when I took on this role was manage to extract from the Treasury an additional £80 million to go into our court maintenance fund. And that's important because it allows us now to plan not just over the 1 year in a reactive way, but in a proactive way over time. You get more efficiencies, more for your money, and it means that great courts like those in her constituency in Sheffield can continue to do the business.
Debbie Abraham.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. How does the backlog in criminal court cases vary by region, and what discussions has the Secretary of State had with local judicial teams on both the prioritisation and communications of these backlogs?
So the senior presiding judge will keep a close eye on regional discrepancies, and there is, of course, the power in certain cases to transfer cases from one court to another court, but that will depend upon the suitability for defendants, but also witnesses and victims who need to attend the hearings. But it is important that we send the message from this chamber that, as I say, over 90% of all criminal trials, the cases that people want to get resolved, the criminal damage, the drugs matters, the common assault, these are dealt with in the Magistrates' Court, and magistrates up and down our country are doing an excellent job at getting through those cases.
Andy Carter.
Very much, Mr Speaker. I absolutely endorse the comments of the Lord Chancellor in relation to magistrates working incredibly hard to clear backlogs in courts. The Minister will have seen some recent journalistic reporting in relation to single justice procedure, which is an important element of the magistrate's work. The principle behind the single justice procedure is good. I've sat on cases myself in SJP courts, but there are some concerns, particularly around vulnerable individuals who may have mitigation that is not necessarily being addressed. Does he agree with me that perhaps he can remind members on the bench that magistrates can already use their discretion to refer cases back to open court, where prosecutors can review cases to ensure that individuals who are vulnerable are not served with injustice?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I begin by paying tribute to him and his colleagues for the exceptional work that he does to ensure that justice is done. So on the single justice procedure, fairness is non-negotiable. So it's absolutely critical that every person who comes before the courts, whether it's via the CJP or an open court, gets that fairness. I do think there is an issue about transparency. I think some important points have been raised and echoed, incidentally, by the Chair of the Justice Select Committee. I think that's something that we ought to look at recalibrating. Everyone accepts the SJP procedure works well and is a useful addition. We just need to see whether it ought to be refined in the interest of promoting transparency.
Minister Kevin Brennan.
On this one?
That's what I'm told, is it not?
No.
Move on to Chris Evans.
Number 11, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. End of custody supervised licence began in October 2023, and an analysis of and statistics on its use will be based on 1 year's worth of data and published on an annualised basis, in line with other statistics, such as, for example, deaths of offenders in the community, which we consider to be the appropriate approach.
Chris Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this month, the Chair of the Justice Select Committee, who was in his place, said the prisons are at bursting point, while the Prisoner Governors Association said that without the extension of the end of custody supervised licence scheme, our criminal justice system may have ground to a halt. Meanwhile, the Domestic Abuse Commissioner has labelled these plans as dangerous to domestic abuse victims. Is the Minister satisfied that the scheme manages the prison population while keeping the victims of crime safe? And if so, when will he release data about which prisoners have been released?
Grateful to the honourable gentleman. There's a number of points there. The ECSL is a response to, yes, acute capacity challenges, but it is a targeted scheme operating in prisons as required and where necessary. I would gently say to him that a similar scheme ran in 2007 till 2010. In that case, that bore significant differences to what is happening now, because ECSL, as operating now, contains a range of important safeguards that were simply not in place between 2007 and 2010. The 2007-2010 scheme released some people straight into the community without any supervision and led to early release of some prisoners convicted of terror offences. This is totally different. It plays a role in managing the prison capacity challenges, but it has those important safeguards in place to protect victims and society.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our prisons are full, so much so that the government is sanctioning the early release of inmates to make space. At what point are we going to prioritise the deportation of foreign criminals who are taking up 1 in 9 of our prison cells, so we can get back to zero tolerance policing and ensure that no crime is too small to go unpunished?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, Mr. Speaker, because she's quite right to highlight that a key element of tackling the prison capacity crisis is sending back through deportation foreign national offenders. She will be reassured that 18,000 have been deported in the last 4 years, and we continue to drive that target ever higher.
Minister Kevin Brennan.
Better late than never, Mr. Speaker. It's telling he's actually refusing to come clean with the public, though, on how many prisoners are being released early under the scheme. As we know, the public are overwhelmingly in favour of an early release scheme if it were applied to his colleagues in a general election. But does he have any intention before that happy day of releasing the truth about how many prisoners are being let out early?
Well, it's always a pleasure to face the gentle barbs of the honourable gentleman, who I've known for a long time. As I made very clear on a previous occasion of this House, and indeed just a few moments ago, we consider that an annualised publication of these statistics is the most appropriate approach, in line with the publication of other similar sorts of statistics, for example, deaths of offenders in the community.
Chris Law.
Well, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Legal Aid Agency monitors the provision of immigration legal aid and takes whatever action is operationally available to them to ensure a supply of providers.
Mr. Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was hoping for an answer, but we didn't get one, so how about try this? While we all desperately want to see the Tories' asylum backlog cleared, this effort must be well funded and one which ensures access to justice. Instead, what we have, Mr. Speaker, is an under-resourced bureaucracy pushed to make rushed asylum decisions, combining the severe difficulty of accessing immigration legal aid, which has meant thousands of asylum seekers are effectively being denied the right to legal representation. So, why does the UK Government stand alone in not recognising the enormous crisis in immigration legal aid?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, it's the government who are spending £44 million in 2022 to 2023 on immigration legal aid, and that's why we have now increased the hourly work for those undertaking this kind of work. That's why we're looking at remote access and also why we're looking at paying for travelling. All steps to increase the level of funding in this important area. But I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I do think it takes a particular bit of brass neck when the SNP lecturers on the funding of legal aid. I refer the gentleman to the comments made in scottishlegal.com, which I've commented on how the SNP have decimated legal aid in Scotland.
SNP spokesperson Chris Stevens.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps the Minister can answer this question then. So the Bar Council has repeatedly highlighted that asylum claimants of otherwise meritorious cases have often gone through multiple appeals due to very poor or no legal representation. That jacks up the costs for the courts, the Home Office and local authorities, all while trapping vulnerable people in an agonising limbo. If the Government will not address the crisis in immigration legal aid because it's the right thing to do, will they at least do so because it's the financially sound thing to do?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, we're already increasing the amount of fees for those people taking on legal aid work to do with the Illegal Migration Act. It's a 15% increase on the increases already seen in legal aid. On top of that, we are rolling out remote access to the duty advice scheme, and we're also introducing payment for travel. Major steps forward to ensuring there is availability of legal aid. So the actual description of the Honourable Gentleman I simply do not accept. And if you want to start swapping comments from the Bar Council, then I can start quoting the Scottish Bar Council and their views on the SNP's record.
John Penrose.
Question 14, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, reducing reoffending is a core mission of this government. And as my honourable friend the Lord Chancellor said in an answer earlier, we act not on the basis of emotion, but on the basis of evidence, deploying a series of carefully researched interventions from the prison employment leads to the provision of 12 weeks accommodation post-release, and that's why the reoffending rate has decreased since 2010 from 31% to 25%. The Justice Data Lab makes an important contribution by providing HMPPS and external organisations with a robust assessment of whether their interventions work, and we will continue to consider their work carefully.
John Penrose.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the adherence to evidence-based approach to working out whether or not these various different programmes work effectively or not. And can I urge ministers to go even further by ensuring that every programme that we currently commission is reassessed on the basis of outcomes and then not recommissioned unless those outcomes measure up. I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I can confirm that the Government will continue to base its investment decisions to reduce reoffending on the best available evidence at that time. We are continuously improving our evidence base, including through the cross-government Better Outcomes through Linked Data programme.
Right, we now come to topicals. We start with topical 1, Tam Juicy. That's it.
Number 1, please, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since the last oral justice questions, I visited HMP Liverpool, a prison which received a poor inspection report some years ago, and I saw how it has been transformed. Prisoners were engaged in constructive activity in the cycle repair workshop and elsewhere. Cells have been refurbished. There was a clear sense of pride amongst prison officers determined to deliver safety, decency and rehabilitation, because prisons, as well as prisoners, it seems, can be redeemed. I visited Liverpool Crown Court to see our intensive supervision courts in action, tackling the root causes of offending with treatment for addictions. I went to Coventry, where I saw rapid deployment teams of offenders sentenced to carry out unpaid work, clearing up local neighbourhoods, visibly atoning for their crimes, and doing so within 48 hours of the project being nominated by the public. I was pleased to support the Honourable Member for Caerphilly's important SLAPS bill, to tackle abusive and chilling lawsuits, and we have brought forward legislation on litigation funding agreements to ensure that third parties can continue to fund court proceedings on behalf of individuals or small businesses. That was the support which enabled the sub-postmasters to make their successful civil claim. Our legislation will bolster access to justice, boost our legal sector, and ensure that in our courts, David can still take on Goliath.
Mr. Speaker, with the government achieving only 5,900 of the promised 20,000 new prison places, resulting in them having to release prisoners up to 60 days early to alleviate overcrowding, thereby directly impacting public safety. So how does the Secretary of State reconcile this with a Conservative promise of being tough on crime, especially when his end-of-custody supervised licensing scheme expansion significantly deviates from judicial sentencing?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. So I was in practice and I had to listen to the then Labour Home Secretary say how he was going to cancel the 3 Titan prisons which he boasted he was going to open. Not one was built. We have opened 5 wells, Fossway, Millsacres under construction. We've got more cells coming on at Birmingham, at Liverpool, in Norwich. We've got rapid deployment cells. We've got new house blocks in Guy's Marsh, in Rise Hill, in Hatfield. This is the party that's delivering. We will be tough on crime.
Can I just gently say, there's a lot of people I need to get in, but could just shorten the answers, it will be more helpful. Tom Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I recently met my constituent David Winnett, who is a family law solicitor and a member of Resolution. He told me about Resolution's vision for family justice. I wonder if my right honourable friend is familiar with Resolution's vision for family justice, and particularly the importance placed on early legal advice in family disputes. And I wondered if there is scope to add that scheme that they're proposing to the mediation pilots the government is currently planning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Resolution do exceptionally important work, and in the budget the Chancellor announced an additional £55 million to support separating parents, including £12 million to deliver a new pilot. We are working with Resolution and other organisations to implement the pilot, which we aim to launch in September this year.
So, Secretary Shabana Mahmood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This Conservative government had promised 20,000 prison places by 2025, but so far they've only delivered under 6,000. The Justice Secretary is letting violent offenders out up to 2 months early because, as we found out from press briefings about dire warnings to Number 10, he's got literally nowhere to put them. So instead of focusing on what happened 14 years ago under the last Labour government, will he level with the public about the true scale of the prison's capacity crisis that is unfolding on his watch?
Being very candid that there are pressures in our prisons. But here's the thing. Capacity in our jails is significantly higher than it was under her watch. Second, we have a record of delivery and there will be 10,000 places by the next year. But here's the really important point. There are 2 questions which I posed in my statement. Would Labour have let out up to 16,000 people during COVID, yes or no? We said no. And second, would Labour have got rid of jury trials? We didn't, and they wouldn't. If they had made the same decisions as us, they would face the same pressures. This is opportunism, it's silly, and Britain deserves better.
Shabana Mahmood.
Speaker, bring on the general election. I'll happily answer those questions. I suppose I am not surprised that the Secretary of State does not want to acknowledge the truth, Mr. Speaker. As probation officers have told me, they genuinely fear not being able to keep the public safe because they are being forced to rush through the early release of violent men in order to free up space. He will have heard the same concerns. So what is he going to do about it?
It's really important that the public are not inadvertently misled. So this does not apply to those on life sentences, those on IPPs, those on extended determinate sentences, any sex offenders, any terrorism offences, any serious violent offenders. And the difference between our scheme and theirs is under their scheme, the Governor had no discretion to block the release. Under ours, they do. That is the difference. We prioritise public safety, they prioritise politics.
Speaker, my constituent Cindy went through hell when her daughter Victoria was brutally raped and attacked by a serial offender Donald Andrews, and Victoria took her life not long after. Now, this monster was a regular offender before, and to add insult to injury, his whole life sentence has been quashed and is now applying for parole. Now, police psychologists and other professionals have deemed this attacker to be at high risk to society. So will my right honourable friend make similar representations to the parole board that this monster should never be allowed out?
I think many people in this House will have heard about some appalling cases, but this case is truly one of the most shocking and upsetting that any of us will ever have encountered. I can, pass on my deepest sympathy to Cindy Lake for the tragic loss of her daughter Victoria. I can indicate that I did enter an overarching view opposing release, and I can announce that he will not be recommended for release. I hope that will be of some comfort to the family. In the Victims and Prisoners Bill, we're introducing an additional safeguard, specifically a power for the Lord Chancellor to order a second check on the release of the most serious offenders to keep the public safe.
SNP spokesperson Chris Stephen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Government's plans to introduce employment tribunal fees suggest users should pay towards running costs, implying that only those using the system benefit. Yet the Resolution Foundation research shows that tribunals are heavily relied upon to enforce workers' rights for all. So does the Justice Secretary appreciate that any action to deter lower-paid workers from bringing forward cases will be to the detriment of the system as a whole?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We don't believe that a £55 claim issue fee will be deterrent, and the tribunal system costs the taxpayer £8 million a year, and we don't think it's unreasonable that those who use it pay a small contribution, but to answer the point, we don't believe it's a deterrent.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The tragic reality is when intimate partners murder, women are the victims in 90% of cases. What progress has the Government made since the Wade Review in ensuring justice is done in these cases?
Mr Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his question. We are increasing sentences by introducing statutory aggravating factors for murderers that are preceded by controlling or coercive behaviour, that involve overkill, or that are connected with the end of a relationship. And for manslaughter involving sexual conduct, we intend to target cases where death occurs in the context of abusive or degrading sexual conduct. We've consulted publicly on sentencing starting points for murders preceded by controlling or coercive behaviour and for murders committed with a knife or other weapon.
Florence Session-Lomi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. People want access to justice. The Women's Budget Group found that as a result of the disastrous Lasso Act, 85% of vulnerable women are unable to access civil legal aid. The majority of them are reaching crisis point. Does the Minister think it's right that these women are being left without basic access to justice?
The Honourable Lady raised an important point, and I'm very happy to meet with her and take representation on a specific point, and I will obviously discuss that with the Lord Bellamy, who alongside me deals on that civil legal aid point.
Dr. Luke Evans.
The Lord Chancellor for meeting with me and my honourable friend from South Leicestershire to discuss the egregious case of Colin Pitchfork, the double-child rapist, who's had problems bouncing in and out through the parole board system. Now, I know he can't retrospectively change the law around this, but what can he do in future, in upcoming legislation, to make sure that we have the protections for our community to make sure they are safe and these reoffenders are not released?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for raising this incredibly important case and for taking it up on behalf of his constituents so powerfully. So, in the Victims and Prisoners Bill, in the Sentencing Bill, we have a proposal such that people who commit crimes, a murder involving sexual sadistic conduct, will not be released because they could be expected to serve a whole life order. That is just on behalf of the British people. It also helps keep communities like his safe.
Chris Evans.
Mr Speaker, the number of outstanding cases before Gwent Magistrate Courts has risen 21% in the last year alone. However, the number of magistrates are now 20% lower than the whole of South Wales. As we've heard today about the great work of magistrate courts and the fact that magistrates come from all walks of life, what is the government doing to ensure that those hard-to-reach people are offering their services as magistrates, like ethnic minorities and, in particular, younger people?
Mr Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman raised a good point, and I lead on diversity for the Department, and in fact a piece of work is already underway on how we can increase the diversity of the magistrate, but also ensure that we recruit from those hard-to-reach groups, and I'm more than happy to meet with the gentleman to swap ideas as how we can continue to change the face of our magistrates.
Andrew Rosenduck.
Mr Speaker, sir, does the Secretary of State for Justice agree with me that in England and across the United Kingdom, the ancient principle of innocent till proven guilty should be upheld and restored, and that the punishment should never be the process?
Well, look, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. So when I was appointed to this role and I was asked for my priorities, I said that the guilty should be convicted, the innocent walk free and the public protected. It is very important that people have confidence that if they're accused of an offence, that the process should happen in a prompt and humane way. Ultimately, the British people are fair-minded. They want people to be convicted where it's right to do so, and they want also the innocent to walk free.
Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Since the 27th of February, there have been 6 sudden deaths at HMP Park in Bridgend. It would appear at least 4 of these tragic deaths were drug-related. So what is the government doing to ensure that inmates at Park are kept safe and do actually walk out of prison safe and well at the end of their sentence?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and she highlights actually a very serious an important issue. Before answering, I'd say I'm happy to meet with her if she wishes to discuss this further. In line with established protocols for deaths in custody, we're not able to comment on individual cases until the relevant investigation from the Prisons and Probation Service Ombudsman have concluded, but HMP and YOI Park has mobilised a range of actions to gather intelligence on drug entry points and what has happened, but I'm happy to meet with her privately to discuss this.
Sir Christopher Cho.
Speaker, when the National Crime Agency was briefing members interested in the Investigatory Powers Bill, it gave an estimate of between 550,000 and 800,000 serious sexual offenders at large in this country. What is the government doing to identify those, and how many more prisons are we going to have to build to accommodate them?
Well, one of the things that I'm proud of is that since 2010, the number of people being prosecuted for rape is up 32%. Not only that, but the sentences that are being imposed are around 40% longer, and the proportion of those sentences they're spending in custody is longer. We are absolutely determined to do everything possible to send a clear message that serious sexual offending is a priority for this government. We'll clamp down on it, and those who perpetrate this vile crime can expect the punishment they deserve.
Thanks, Davis Jones.
Speaker, the strategic lawsuits against public participation bill brought forward by my friend the Honourable Member for Capilli, which the government is now supporting, is a great opportunity to tackle pernicious lawsuits which seek to silence journalists, campaigners and even sexual assault survivors. But 2 key deficiencies, the overly subjective test and the narrow definition of public interest, mean that anti-SLAPP campaigners tell me they simply cannot support the bill in its current form. So ahead of the important committee stage, will the Lord Chancellor commit to looking at the amendments suggested by the News Media Association and meet with me to address their concerns so that this bill actually does become fit for purpose?
For raising this important issue. So I am aware of the issues that have been raised. Plainly, there is a delicate balance to strike. It is incredibly important that individuals can access the court to get a remedy in appropriate cases, and we want to make sure that that balance is properly struck. We will consider it with care. I've done so also with the DCMS Secretary of State, and if she wants to make representations to me, I will listen to them very carefully.
Mr Speaker, Worksop witnessed the horrific murder of Pauline Quinn by a man who had been released previously from a double murder. Since then, the probation service have admitted that mistakes have been made. However, the public still have many questions that are unanswered. So does the Minister agree with me that whilst it is understandable that sometimes all the information cannot be put in the public domain, that the probation service should seek to be as transparent as possible and give communities that information where possible?
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising this important issue. He is right to highlight that there are some occasions where not all information is able to be made public, but it's important that there is as much transparency as there can be, and if it's helpful to him, I'm happy to meet with him to discuss it further.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Selby is classified by the Law Society as a legal advice desert for housing, education and family legal aid. What are the Minister's plans to fix this?
Mr Speaker, the Legal Aid Agency keep it constantly under review as to where we have providers, but on the specific types of legal aid that the Honourable Gentleman has raised, we've actually invested an additional £10 million in the last few months. If the Honourable Gentleman would like to write to me, I can give him the details of where that spend is going in his local area.
Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Over the last 20 years,
Joshua Rosenberg, KC, has presented Law in Action on Radio 4, and that has frequently shed important lights on areas that need attention within our justice system. Will he share my disappointment that today's broadcast will be the last of that programme because it is not being recommissioned? Would he also pay tribute to Joshua Rosenberg for the work he's done?
I'm very grateful to the Honourable and Learned Gentleman for raising that point. Joshua Rosenberg, I think, has made a profound and important contribution to our country. Indeed, he's required reading. I read him most days, and I do share his profound regret, and I echo his sentiments. I think the whole House will wish Joshua Rosenberg well.
Dr. Ruperhut.
All Lent, Mr. Speaker, women nationwide have faced intimidation from the anti-choice group 40 Days for Life, blocking their entrance to abortion clinics daily. Why is this happening when MPs voted by a ratio of 3 to 1 in 2022 for safe access loans, the Minister on the front bench being one of them?
Well, I concur with the Honourable Lady. It is completely unacceptable that anyone should feel harassed or intimidated when exercising their legal right to abortion services. My honourable friend will, I hope, be reassured to hear that it is anticipated that Section 9 of the Public Order Act 2023 will be commenced no later than this spring. The consultation on the guidance published by the Home Office closed on the 22nd of January, and the final response will be published in due course. I must just say one thing, though. It is right that a balance will need to be struck where competing rights are engaged, including under Articles 10 and 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights.
John Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our probation service is in crisis. Probation staff are overworked, overstretched and undervalued. And the expansion of the early release scheme is going to put yet more pressure on them. So what is the Minister doing this year to help our probation staff face this extra workload?
She's right. Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady? Probation officers do an exceptionally important job, as I think we all agree. So in terms of what we've done in respect of prisons and probation staff, first, we accepted every penny of the prison service peer review body recommendations. So far as probation is concerned, we've injected extra funding of more than £155 million a year. And I'm delighted to report that certainly when it comes to prison officers, and I know it's a tough job, as I know probation is a tough job, but the retention is improving, with the staff resignation rate in respect to prisons dropping from around 10.7 to 8.3%, and the numbers increased. But so far as probation is concerned, we've recruited around 4,000 people in the last 3 years. That is positive, and we will continue to support them every step of the way.
Sir Christopher Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do we have enough crematoria in the UK when many families are now having to wait 3, 4, 5 and 6 weeks for a funeral slot? And why is there such a gap between the cheapest crematorium in the country, which charges £408, and the most expensive in Stevenage, which charged £1,400 last year?
Mr. Speaker, the challenges facing the crematoria and, in fact, the whole funeral sector is currently being reviewed by the Law Commission. It's not just about crematoria, it's also about burial space. There are challenges across the whole, to use the technical term, death management landscape, and that's why the Law Commission are investigating and bringing forward proposals.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The fees for civil legal aid are half what they were in 1996, and the number of providers has fallen by 40% in the last 10 years. If the Minister actually wants to do something about civil legal aid, why has he kicked the civil legal aid review into the long grass?
Mr. Speaker, in terms of the legal aid, it's always under constant review, and I will always take advice from those who are closest to it. And that's why I engage with whether it's the Bar Association or the Law Society or the Judiciary as to what we need to do. So in terms of kicking it down into the grass, all I can say is I want to get it right, and if that takes time, it'll take time.
Final question, Debbie Abraham.
Speaker, the Justice Secretary didn't quite answer my question on where the 67,000 criminal case backlogs are and how these are being prioritised and communicated. I do not want another historic CSE victim to be told by a Crown Court that her case has been cancelled twice because it's not a priority.
Can I thank the honourable lady? The point I was endeavouring to make, perhaps not well, is that, of course, listing is a judicial function. And so we've seen with the senior presiding judge make a decision in respect of those sex cases and those most serious rapes, for example, all of them are serious, of course, that they will be given an early listing. As I say, I don't have complete control over that, but I do discuss it with the Lady Chief Justice, and I know the senior presiding judge is very keen to get through those cases at the earliest opportunity.
Right, that completes questions. We'll let the front benches change over.